Germany's far right has failed in its attempt to send shockwaves across the political landscape in a regional election. Exit polls show Angela Merkel's Conservatives have comfortably seen off a challenge from the Alternative for Germany in the eastern state of Saxony-Anhalt. The AfD did not manage to win a surprise victory over the Chancellor's party, but the far right still makes up the second biggest bloc in the regional parliament. So voting has now ended, so let's take a look at the projected results based on exit polls taken throughout the day. As you can see there, Angela Merkel's Conservatives, the CDU, are on 35.9, the far-right AfD on 22.7, the Socialist Left Party 10.9, the centre-left SPD on 8.3, the Environmentalist Greens on 6.5 and the business-friendly FDP on 6.4. Right, well, to talk about the significance of these results, I'm joined by DW political correspondent Hans Brandt here in the studio. Hi, Hans, and welcome to the programme. And DW's chief political editor, Michaela Kufner, who joins us from Magdeburg. Right, so I'm going to start with Michaela. Michaela, Angela Merkel's CDU has emerged from the election well ahead of the AfD, yet Saxony-Anhalt is a relatively small German state. So why does this regional election matter so much?
Well, like so often in life, it's the timing, because this is the last test ahead of those elections at the end of September that will mark the end of the Merkel era and will decide what comes next. But it's also because it's one of those eastern states where the AfD did particularly well in the past and is still actually doing well. It came out of nowhere 5 years ago, almost got 25%, now just around about 22%, and Angela Merkel's party really bouncing back here and exceeding all expectations, one can say, because the next question we have to ask, what's up with those opinion polls? Even the most optimistic one put Angela Merkel's CDU party not above 30%. Now it might be 36 if these exit polls translate into results. And nobody had seen the AfD do below 23. And that is exactly what happened here, according to those exit polls. So big question marks over how much the polling is worth, and a resounding victory for the Conservative CDU party, which it badly needs going into what has so far been a rather shaky election campaign.
Right, so a resounding victory, it appears, for the CDU. Now, many thought, Michaela, that the AfD party could win. But what did the CDU offer that the AfD couldn't?
Well, it did offer a much more conservative tone than many conservatives actually fear is mainstream. Angela Merkel, of course, often having criticized for having shifted the party more towards the center. Rainer Haseloff, the state premier, quite clearly gained trust and popularity over those past 5 years. And that is something that we've also seen in previous regional elections that often appeared to be the exception from the general rule of what the average polling shows in Germany. It's personality politics, quite clearly, and that's also a signal to all parties going into the run-up to those general elections in September, that it's the personality that matters, and that can prove to be then an exception to the rule of what the national polling is showing, and that certainly worked for the Conservative CDU and Rainer Haseloff, the state premier here.
All right, we'll leave it there for the moment, Michaela Kufner. We're going to turn to you, Hans, here in the studio. What does this result say, or actually, what does this victory mean on a national level for the CDU? Is it likely that the party will repeat this success in September?
Oh, it's very early days talking about the election at the end of September. Of course, the CDU will take a boost from this because they did very well, very well here. And so they will feel that this will give them a boost ahead of the elections in September. But we have to see that this is a very small state. There are 2 million people living there out of more than 80 million people in Germany. So this result cannot be copied onto the German national scene. And on a national level, the Greens will be a lot more challenging for the Conservatives than they have been in this state. And all the other, more or less, second-ranking parties, too, will have a lot stronger showing on a national level. That does not go for the AfD. The AfD, in fact, nationally is weaker than it is here in this state, which is one of its core states. So the elections will give some sort of boost for the Conservatives, but they're not at all a prediction of results for the end of September for the national elections.
Well, what's your main takeaway from all of this then? If you're saying that it's not, you know, very reflective perhaps of the rest of the country, but what is it that you're maybe surprised about at first glance, or maybe not surprised?
I think what you can say here is that the Greens did not do as well as they had hoped, and they are hoping to do very well to get very close, at least, to the Conservatives on a national level. And you have to look at all the somewhat smaller parties, the Free Democrats, the business-friendly party, the Social Democrats, who are now also more or less a second-ranking party, the Greens, and also the far-left party. All of them are hoping to do much better in the national polls, and as a result, to have some chance of becoming part of a government, because there will have to be a coalition government at national level. And the question is who the Conservatives, the strongest party most likely, are going to need or going to want to have a coalition with.
All right, we're going to leave it there for the moment. DW political correspondent Hans Brandt and DW's chief political editor Michaela Köfner in Saxony-Anhalt. Thanks to both of you. Right, we'll cross over to the regional headquarters of the AfD in a moment, but first a look now at why the AfD was thought to pose such a threat to the Christian Democrats in eastern Germany.
Querfurt is an idyllic little town. One of Germany's largest medieval castles sits right in its center. Life is tranquil here. There is hardly any crime. May 2021 was campaigning season. Hans-Thomas Tilschneider represents the AfD in the local council as well as in Saxony-Anhalt state parliament. 1 in 3 people in Querfurt has voted for the AfD in the past. Tilschneider won over voters with messages that play well here. We will introduce free daycare and free school lunches. We will also start a deportation offensive and immediately deport all immigrants who don't have a residency permit. Blanket prejudices of this sort about immigrants and refugees find considerable support here. Take foreigners, for example, because foreigners have more special rights here than we Germans do, and that's not okay. Yet there are hardly any foreigners to be found. This can be traced back to the history of East Germany. The German Democratic Republic, or GDR, was a separate country from the rest of Germany until 1990, and it was a socialist dictatorship, authoritarian and militaristic. Social diversity was not desired, immigration was only rarely allowed. GDR citizens overthrew the government, Germany was reunified. But the economy and social infrastructure of the former East Germany collapsed. Many people felt that they were let down and had lost out, a sentiment that continues to shape the social climate. Over the last 25 years, we have observed that many young people who were very mobile and had ideas for shaping their own lives decided to leave Eastern Germany for social, economic and cultural reasons. And those who stayed here, even the younger generation, tended to be the ones who were most cautious, the most fearful, perhaps even the ones most likely to articulate these prejudices. And these are exactly the people the AfD reaches out to.
Diese Vorurteile artikulieren und die sind dann eben auch für die AfD erreichbar.
The AfD courts them, claiming to be the party that will solve all their problems, but they also act divisively. When we rule the country one day, then I promise you, these shady mobs will have another thing coming, and then a new day will dawn for you. AfD voters don't mind radical speeches, and they don't mind the fact that Tilschneider has ties to right-wing extremists. On the contrary, what they want here is a party who rejects what democratic Germany stands for, a culturally diverse society.
Right, well, DW correspondent Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber is at the Alternative for Germany party headquarters in Saxony-Anhalt. Hi, Benjamin. It looks like the AfD will end up with a smaller share of the vote than the last election in Saxony-Anhalt. How's the party reacting where you are?
That's right, it was a surprise, but politicians here, AfD politicians who went to the stage, have said that they managed to retain the voters of the last elections. They are still saying it's a success. We just had the party top candidate Tino Kupala saying that this was a sign and a boost ahead of the general elections in September. But of course, if we consider that there were some polls showing the far-right AfD party even in the lead against the Conservative Party of Chancellor Angela Merkel, of course, these numbers aren't as high as the ones that they expected.
Benjamin, what does this result mean for the AfD heading into September's election?
Well, it's a rather symbolic election. We just heard it from our colleague Michaela Küffner, who said 1.2 million voters were invited to cast the ballots today. So it's rather symbolic. It's a boost for the current state premier, who will go into coalition talks. It could be either the Green Party, the Social Democrats, the SPD, or the business-friendly FDP party. It's important to note that even if the AfD had reached the majority, it would not have been able to get into the coalition with other parties, as all the other parties have said that they would not have a coalition for them. So for them, it's an important boost. Several AfD politicians have went to the stage here and have said that it is a success, that they are showing that people still want to follow them, especially the programs that they had here in the state, in the eastern state of Saxony-Anhalt, that has been rather nationalistic and even more radical than in other parts of the country. So even though the numbers could not be reached, the numbers that they tried to show and the numbers that several polls have shown, they are trying to sell it as a success.
Right, so they're trying to sell it as a success. You said it there, the pre-election polls suggested the result would be much closer. Why do you think that the AfD failed to build on its vote share, though?
It might be that the CDU now also campaigned in the last days since this polls came out, showing that a far-right party would reach a majority in the state. They tried also to appeal to voters. We just had Tino Kupala, one of the top party's candidates, saying that people here voted more conservative, but it's important to remember that the AfD is a far-right party that is under surveillance in several parts of the country, and the youth organization of this party is also under surveillance by domestic intelligence agencies. So that's something that we've heard from politicians of the party trying to show themselves as conservatives, but they are far more on the right spectrum of the political spectrum.
All right, we'll leave it there. DW correspondent Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber, thanks so much. Right, well, joining me now is Helge Lindt, member of the German Bundestag for the Social Democrats. He's been campaigning against right-wing extremism and racism on the national level for years. Hi, Helge. Now, the AfD seems to have been strongly defeated by the CDU. Still, almost 1 in 4 people in Saxony-Anhalt votes far-right. How much does that worry you?
It worries me a lot. I'm happy that it's good for the democracy that Haseloff, and it was mainly Haseloff's personal success, that he was successful for the CDU and that he stopped the development of the AfD, but there's still more than 20% of the population of the voters pro-AfD, and you must know that the AfD in Saxony-Anhalt is a very right-wing extremist AfD. Their leader, Mr. Kirchner, was member of the Flügel, this folkish nationalist wing of the AfD. So this is the hardest part, the most extremist part of the AfD, to speak clearly.
Right, so what about their positions? So you're talking about the positions they're taken by the AfD in Saxony-Anhalt. But overall, is the AfD becoming more mainstream in Germany?
Well, it's a paradox, I think. We have to see, but we should not accept it, that's getting a kind of normality. to have on the federal level for the federal elections maybe 10, 11, 12% for the AfD. It's less in the western states, it's clearly more in the eastern states. On the other hand, if you look at the program, if you look at the personalities, if you look at the statements in the parliaments, they get more and more aggressive. So they don't move towards the center, they move towards the right wing. So it's a paradox development, but I think we see some tendencies that they try to combine certain issues. On the one hand, as we see it in Saxony-Anhalt, the question of immigration, fight against globalization, diversity. On the other hand, they strengthen their competence, their issues on the social justice level to get workers for the support. So that's a double strategy in the eastern countries.
Right, well, moving to your party, the SPD, they've lost even more votes this time in Saxony-Anhalt. Why do you think that is?
Well, we had kind of showdown. So people, even supporters of the Social Democratic Party and of the Green Party, they decided to give their votes to Haseloff to stop the success of the AfD. So it was a tactical decision of them. And on the other hand, we have to be honest that if you look at the polls, many people in Saxony-Anhalt, in countries with a comparable structural situation, have lost confidence in the idea of social justice promoted by the Social Democratic Party. So it's a long-term loss of confidence.
Right, well, looking at at the exit polls so far, what does this regional election teach you, considering there are national elections in Germany in September?
Well, of course, the CDU, the Christian Democrats, will say it's a tendency for the federal election. I think it's more complicated because it was a special situation in a small country, and it was a decision not for Mr. Laschet, but mainly for Mr. Haseloff. So everything is open. We can see that the CDU can win election, but they can also lose. We see that the trend towards a victory of the Green Party might be stopped, but I think the forthcoming month will decide a lot. It will be a battle, so to speak, between the candidates, between Baerbock, Laschet and Scholz, and this will be the decision.
All right, we'll leave it there. German lawmaker Helge Lind, thank you for your analysis there.
Thank you. Bye.
Right, well, voting has now ended, so let's actually take a look at the projected results. Angela Merkel's Conservatives, the CDU, are on 36%, the far-right AfD on 22.7%, the Socialist Left Party on 10.8%, the centre-left SPD on 8.3%, the Environmentalist Greens on 6.6%, and the business-friendly FDP on 6.5%.